Good day, everybody. Attorney Greg Lake here with the Entheogenic Esquire podcast and YouTube channel. Glad you can join us. Today, we're going to be jumping into what we could say, mishandling of the crime scene by law enforcement and authorities at Utah Valley University on September 10th, 2025, immediately after the incident involving Charlie Kirk. Many people have seen video footage of how that crime scene was handled, and in the context of Tyler Robinson's trial and potential death penalty sentence, have a lot of questions about how the crime scene being handled or mishandled will affect Tyler Robinson's ability to get a fair trial. A absolutely fair question. Now, I did do a video on this issue yesterday. However, after reviewing another video by Life is Driving, which is one of the more popular videos that really gives more context of the timeline between shot and then fortunately, Adam was able to get right up front and center and see exactly how these officials were handling the crime scene. And so, thinking back about it, I think this video is actually going to be even better because, as we did yesterday, I'm going to be diving into the Department of Justice's manual of how police across the country essentially are supposed to handle crime scenes. And really, what we're going to be looking at, okay, is whether we believe there is some element of bad faith or just simple negligence on the part of law enforcement on that day. And admittedly, my video yesterday didn't quite really click into the analysis as I was really hoping for. And so today is also going to be me more or less trying to rectify and get all that straight with everybody. I want to make sure that at the very least my viewers know exactly what that analysis is. Ultimately, whether Tyler's due process rights have been violated or not are going to be up to the court ultimately. But, when assessing whether the way that this crime scene was handled was simply negligence or an element of bad faith, we'll let you decide that. Unfortunately, we don't have all the evidence that the defense and the state are looking at right now. And so in that way, we're kind of limited on exactly how we can assess it. But we will compare what the Department of Justice's handbook for crime scene handling says versus how it was actually handled, both in the context of the timeline. And then again, we will also listen to some audio on this track as well that will be important for our analysis. And then a lot of people also have questions about the way Terrell Farnsworth, who is a TPUSA, I think, audio and visual contractor, many people saw him, one, take a kind of selfie shock video behind the campus immediately after the event, and then based upon the video, seems to have come into the area where Charlie Kirk was sitting at the time of the incident and ended up moving a lot of items, grabbing a camera, multiple SD cards, and many people have questions about, is this legal? Is this something that bystanders can just walk up to a crime scene and start grabbing items of evidence like this? And so we will also spend some time discussing that a little bit too today. And so I hope you enjoy. We'll hop right in. Again, I have the Adam with Life is Driving video, and then I have the DOJ handbook, and I have a handful of photos. Again, I did show at least the photos in the handbook yesterday. The video is going to be a different video from Blake Bednar's video. Thank you, Blake. But for our purposes here, the Life is Driving, when I'm thinking about it now, provides a more full context for us to really sink into these analyses. And so I hope you enjoy. On the back end, we will do some conclusory remarks before we end it. And so stay tuned. Hope to see you there. Okay, so as opposed to yesterday, we're going to start this video, or at least the analysis part, with the actual handbook that I've been referencing. And as you can see on the screen here, this is the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, National Institute of Justice, Crime Scene Investigation, a guide for law enforcement. Now, admittedly, this is a relatively old publication, copyright 99. I think it was published in 2000. However, I do believe that these are very basic and fundamental aspects of conducting crime scene investigation. And so my impression and understanding is that these are still very relevant to how departments all over the country are supposed to conduct themselves in doing a crime scene investigation. So anyways, so yeah, January 2000 publication date. We'll keep going down. Let's see. And so they do make a bit of a statement here on the applicability. It says, this handbook is intended as a guide to recommended practices for crime scene investigation. I mean, I think people could understand that, the Department of Justice is obviously going to be at the top tier of research and understanding these things, and responsible in many ways for promulgating, standards for departments all across the country. So I would be extremely surprised if, for whatever reason, the UVU police or the Provo, city police, sheriff, if any of them have standards that vary in any meaningful way from what we're going to look at here. Lest I digress. Here we go. So here, number 4. Secure and control persons at the scene. And again, we're going to go over these, and so just keep them at the forefront so that way when we review the video, you'll be able to kind of identify in real time as we're watching the video what's going wrong here. So 1, and this is probably one, obviously the main one that we can point to as we'll see, but secure and control persons at the scene. Controlling, identifying, removing persons at the crime scene, and limiting the number of persons who enter the crime scene and the movement of such persons is an important function of the initial responding officers in protecting the crime scene. Control individuals at the scene, prevent individuals from altering, destroying physical evidence by restricting movement, location, activity while ensuring and maintaining safety at the scene. And so it even goes through the type of individuals we would see at a scene. Suspects, secure and separate. Witnesses, secure and separate. Bystanders, determine whether a witness, obviously if they're a witness, you're going to want to, separate them, but you want to get their statement. And if not, they just simply need to go. Victims, family, friends. So it says here you need to control them as these other ones, but with a little bit of compassion. And then also medical and other assisting personnel. But here's a very important one for what we're going to see is exclude unauthorized and non-essential personnel from the scene. Okay, and this even includes law enforcement officials who aren't working the case. So even people who are law enforcement officials don't necessarily have a need to be or will be allowed to be at a crime scene under normal circumstances, according to this guide. Okay, and it even includes politicians in the media. Definitely keep them out, right? Anyways, summary: controlling the movement of persons at the crime scene and limiting the number of persons who enter the crime scene is essential to maintaining scene integrity, safeguarding evidence, and minimizing contamination. Okay, which again, I'll notice a lot of this self-evident, especially after the last 30, 40 years of CSI, watching on TV. So, but I just want to make sure that we are looking at this by the book. Okay. Number 5, boundaries: identify, establish, protect, and secure. Okay, and so it says here, defining controlling boundaries provides a means for protecting and securing the crime scene. The number of crime scenes and their boundaries, and here we'll see we essentially have 2 more or less that needed tending to. Okay, one got more than the other. The number of crime scenes and their boundaries are determined by their locations and the type of crime. Boundaries shall be established beyond the initial scope of the crime scene with the understanding that they can be reduced but cannot be easily expanded, okay? Because once, people on the outer reach of a crime scene have been trampling all over, picking things up, moving things, sure, you can move the scene beyond there, but the probability that the evidence will have been contaminated or lost or destroyed drastically increases, depending on the circumstances. But here it says, the initial responding officers should establish boundaries of the scene starting at the focal point and extending outward, right? So when we look at this video, I would assume for police purposes that the focal point at, where was actually where Charlie was sitting, working out from there. But staying out, so where the crime occurred, it says places where the victim evidence may have been moved, be aware of trace and impression evidence while assessing the scene. Set up physical barriers: ropes, cone, crime scene barrier tape, available vehicles, personnel, yada yada, or use existing boundaries. So we'll see how they did this. Effect measures to protect evidence that may be lost or compromised. Protect from the elements, rain, snow, wind, and from footsteps, fire tracks, sprinklers. Document the original location of the victim or objects that you observe being moved. Okay, so we're obviously going to see some objects being moved here. here's a kind of an important note too, is persons should not move any items, including weapons, unless necessary for the safety and well-being of persons at the scene. And, this really goes to the term Farnsworth, which we will also discuss today. I've heard it on some other videos that he was trying to protect people from a terrorist attack, okay? Obviously, you're free will to take that as you will. I don't obviously buy that, but just wanted to point that out because it is, in a way, mentioned in the manual here. But it says establishing boundaries is a critical aspect in controlling the integrity of evidentiary material. And again, I think that's self-explanatory, but I just want you to hear it from the DOJ's mouth, okay? Here, document actions and observations, right? So documentation, hold on. All activities conducted and observations made at the crime scene must be documented as soon as possible after the event to preserve information. Documentation must be maintained as a permanent record. The initial responding officer should document observations of the crime scene, including the location of persons and items within the crime scene and the appearance and condition of the scene upon arrival, okay? And again, I think what we're going to see here, right, is that there is nobody sitting there documenting, at least in view of the camera, documenting where these things were, and all the while, things are getting moved, people are trampling through it, and so, again, this is going to be relevant when we look at the video. So down here, I also wanted to show, contamination control, right? So contamination control and preventing cross-contamination at single or multiple scenes is essential to maintaining the safety of personnel and the integrity of evidence. And then here it says, limit scene access to people directly involved in scene processing, okay? Again, we're going to see there's a lot of people there, had nothing to do with processing the scene, doing a lot of things they shouldn't do. So, according to the manual. Okay, prioritize collection of evidence. Okay, prioritize the collection of evidence to prevent loss, destruction, or contamination. And so it says the investigators in charge and team members shall determine the order in which evidence is collected. And to select a systematic search pattern for evidence collection based on the size and location of the scene. Again, it says be aware of multiple scenes, right? Victim, suspects, vehicles, location, okay? Here we go. Here's an important one. Number 5, collect, preserve, inventory, package, transport, and submit evidence. The handling of physical evidence is one of the most important factors of the investigation, okay? Team members shall ensure the effective collection, preservation, packaging, and transport of evidence. The team members should maintain scene security throughout processing and until the scene is released. Document the collection of evidence by recording its location at the scene, data collection, and who collected it. Establish chain of custody, okay? I can't express strongly enough how important keeping a very clean chain of custody and preferably within law enforcement itself, how important that is, right? And not to say that people outside of law enforcement don't end up, a lot of labs, independent labs test evidence, people outside of law enforcement, experts and the like, do end up handling evidence from time to time, but it's very rare and should probably never happen that an item of physical evidence, especially very important physical evidence, leave a crime scene or be moved at a crime scene by someone who is not in charge of processing or directly involved with processing that crime scene and has the authority to do that, okay? Here, very important. Here's another one. Immediately secure electronically recorded evidence, answering machine tapes, surveillance camera videotapes, computers from the vicinity, okay? And let's immediately, okay? And again, in the background here is immediately by a person, law enforcement, who is authorized, who is tasked with processing that scene and is the appropriate person to be doing it, okay? And then avoid excessive handling of evidence after it is collected, okay? So every time it changes hands, just that little bit more chance of, is this an authentic, basically the authenticity of the evidence, every time it changes hands, if there's a really good chain of custody, it's really solid, right? It's very, very hard, obviously, to challenge the authenticity, but just in the abstract, right, I think you can understand that every time evidence changes hands, it becomes a little bit more attackable or challengeable, I guess you could say, in a sense, right? And so that's it for the for this manual, okay? Again, think about this and just keep these kind of at the forefront. We're going to go through this video and we're going to discuss it as the video is going on. I'll be pointing out some of these things, failures, and then we'll wrap it all up at the end with kind of the master analysis of where we are and whether this was, again, negligence or, intentional bad faith conduct, right? So that's kind of the balance here. And this book right here is serving as our standard to adjudge that. Okay. So let's hop right on over to the video. Okay. So now we're looking at this photograph here, and this is obviously ABC News took this photo, but it is portraying the rooftop where it is alleged that Tyler Robinson took the alleged shot from. The bang heard around the world, or whatever Barron says. Anyways, I think right here is Kash Patel. I think here is Dan Bongino. But, the importance here is to note, there were multiple scenes, right, as we discussed when we were going through the handbook. Look at all the, we can assume these people in suits, right, are kind of the higher ranking officials. And you see them up here apparently taking it very, very seriously. I would be willing to bet no one got within, 500 yards of that rooftop until they were absolutely done processing it, right? And then I want to show you this photo here. This is obviously a photo on September 15th. So the incident happened September 10th. This is them paving over the area in immediate vicinity where Charlie Kirk was sitting at the time of the incident on September 15th, right? And so by this very nature, any evidence, forensic evidence especially, that would have been in and around there, more or less lost forever. Okay, and we'll talk about how that's meaningful again for Tyler Robinson's defense. Now, let's look here. Here's another photo. Obviously, we see some tape up. It looks like, and I'm not really sure which day this is on. And I guess the important thing here is that it doesn't look to me like there's much forensic evidence collection going on here. And I have another photo too. Okay, and here's one with Kash Patel's there. Again, I see a bunch of plainclothes officers. I don't see a lot of forensic testing going. I have not seen any forensic pictures where I can certainly say, yeah, there was forensic evidence collection going on there or processing. The last one I'll show is here. And so this seems to be a drone image of the crime scene. Again, I don't know exactly which day this is. Judging by the shadows, it looks to be later in the afternoon. Perhaps this was the same day. But the important point is that at this juncture, I don't see any crime scene tape around the front of it. I don't see anyone here specifically guarding this scene. Again, it seems very just me, my opinion, it seems suspicious to me, right? It seems that there was a lot of investigatory focus on the rooftop and not so much on this area and in the immediate vicinity where Charlie Kirk was at the time of this very unfortunate incident, okay? And so with that being said, let's switch back over and finish up this analysis. Okay, so now that we've had a chance to look over the video again, thank you, Adam, from Life is Driving. And we were able also to look at the DOJ manual and these pictures. Let's kind of put all this in context. And now we're going to start real quick. Let's just talk about the Terrell Farnsworth issue, because I know a lot of people have kind of had some issues with it, and understandably so. As I mentioned, the statute, the tampering with evidence statute in Utah, is not concerned with whether that was actually his property, and the duty to not mess with evidence at a crime scene doesn't arise only when a judge gives an order or there's some type of seizure proceeding held in an order, right? Whenever there's a crime and it's reasonably believed that there's going to be an investigation and that the things in that area are going to be material to that investigation, you certainly have a duty under the Utah statute not to be messing with it, right? But ultimately, whether Terrell Farnsworth committed an actual crime or not would really go to whether he knowingly or intentionally, took the camera and took the cards for the purpose of, impairing its veracity, its authenticity, altering it, modifying, and destroying it, right? And so we don't know that. We hear that he turned it over to police, I think the FBI. But again, We just simply don't know that for a fact 100%. I will say that it's very odd to me that he was not charged for doing that. Well, I'll say this. It was odd to me that he was even allowed to go onto the scene. I mean, when we look at the way that Charlie's security personnel and Terrell moved about that scene, it was almost as if they were the law enforcement crime scene technicians. So again, it's very odd to me, that whole thing. And look, my impression is that under normal circumstances, he would have definitely, caught a charge for that, simply because regardless of whether he, and it would come down whether he knowingly intentionally did it, but I say that he would at least be charged because it does create authenticity issues, and it's going to take forensic testing to be able to confirm whether indeed that is the authentic video, which if the actual crime scene handbook would have been followed and crime scene technicians would have immediately taken over, and or the police just simply held it down for them to come and take it over, they would have been able to directly collect that evidence and document it, and it would have been a much easier time on either party. We don't know at this juncture whether that evidence is going to be good for the prosecution or defense. I mean, I think many people, I'll say, have the opinion or assuming that it would be the defense based upon everything that we've seen. But in either instance, because he chose to remove it like that, it's going to take a lot of work and perhaps even expert testimony to get that evidence in and try to get the jury to assign as much weight as possible to it. So what Terrell did created issues that now need to be resolved that would not have been there had he just left it alone. Okay, and so for that reason alone, he would have, I think in most instances, my opinion, would have at least been charged with tampering with evidence. But again, that's just my opinion. Now move on next. Now let's talk about Tyler Robinson's defense. And so we need to really think about this in this kind of dichotomy: evidence that was, not lost in the mishandling of the crime scene, in my opinion, mishandled. Evidence like that, like the SD cards, things of that nature, if they're eventually recovered, obviously it creates authenticity issues, right? Because it was not properly secured and it was not properly handled. Now, in regards to the destruction of the evidence, right, we saw a picture, it was eventually paved over a mere 5 days later. Now, that's where really Tyler Robinson's due process claim comes in. If him and his attorneys can show that there's a reasonable probability that evidence, any evidence in that scene that was lost or destroyed, if they can show that has a reasonable possibility of it being exculpatory, meaning that evidence would have tended to prove his innocence, well, then they're going to be in the courthouse, and the judge is then going to have to take a look at like what we just looked at and other factors to determine whether this was simply bad police work or negligence, or was there an element of bad faith on prosecution? We do know that the prosecution was there that day. They testified to that in the last court hearing, okay? And so all these, and the other element that the court would really be looking at is the strength of the remaining evidence, and the strength of the remaining evidence tending to show Tyler Robinson's guilt. Because if there's a whole ton of other evidence just completely, slamming his guilt, make it, basically beyond a reasonable doubt, if the other evidence is pretty clear in that regard, then the case obviously wouldn't be dismissed. Perhaps there would be a lesser sanction, like telling the jury that they can assume that any evidence destroyed would have been bad for the state. However, if the other evidence isn't that strong and it comes out that there's some bad faith elements in them destroying this other evidence, well, that we might be in dismissal territory there, ladies and gentlemen, in my humble opinion. I don't think this will be dismissed. Unfortunately, I don't. However, that's, the law very well might dictate that. Okay. So I just want to make you aware of that. So just kind of wrapping this all up, again, we were looking at this today to really kind of assess what we think about Terrell Farnsworth and maybe his motives in taking the SD cards and the cameras. And then two, to look at how the crime scene was handled by law enforcement officials in terms of the Department of Justice handbook. Was this such a deviation or departure that the only conclusion that we can reach is that there was an element of bad faith on the part of the prosecution versus mere sloppy police work. And that's going to be ultimately right up to you to make that decision. Well, ultimately up to the court, but in your mind, now that you have the analysis, let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe. All the support I can get is very much appreciated. And as always, I love to have conversations in the comments. So if you have any questions, whatever it may be, let me know. I'll be glad to address them. And until next time, peace.